Good Monday morning, everyone. It is now the fifth day reading through Joshua, 3 chapters a day. At Thursday's reading, we cross the halfway mark of this book, at least in terms of the number of chapters. We've read chapter number 12 out of the 24 chapters. At that point in this book, which is labeled and identified as the historical genre, at that point the conquest had been completed, or well, largely completed. However, when we come here to chapter number 13 today, we see that as Joshua is aging, God's going to tell him it's time to go ahead and take care of securing the rest of the land. And today's reading, chapters 13 through 15, deal quite a bit with the land policy. First, they're ascertaining the remainder of the land, and then the distribution of the land. And here in our reading, Moses comes back into the story. Again, this is not written, these details are not in exact and precise chronological order, but as they are taking and assuming the remainder of the portion of land that God has given them, they are going to start to divide the land according to how Moses told them to divide it. Now, when we look in the Hebrew Testament, of course, there's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua. There's an emphasis on proper order. When we look in the book of Genesis there at creation, everything is compartmentalized in Genesis 1 particularly, but also we see it Genesis 2 and 3 and so forth. That with order, that there's a proper contrast of variables, a proper allocation of things. In other words, everything has its proper and appropriate placing. And so here, when it comes to the distribution of land between the tribes of Israel, there are 12 tribes, it's going to be done so with a certain order, because that was consistent with the law that we read about, and with the construction of the tabernacle, what the priests were to wear, as well as the ethical and moral codes throughout Leviticus and Deuteronomy. Everything was appropriately compartmentalized. And so, naturally and accordingly, the land's going to be compartmentalized as well. It was said, one of the things is, out of the 12 tribes, 11 of them are going to receive an allocation of land. However, the tribe of the Levites are not going to receive a distribution of land. The Levites were charged with the tending to the temple and the sacrificial function. This was actually before the temple. It was still during the time of the tabernacle. However, that entire tribe is given to the service of sacrifice. The direct lineage of Aaron, who was a Levite, are the ones who were the priests. So within each of the 11 allocations of land, the Levites are going to dwell, because sacrifices were not only done at the tabernacle, but there were needed to be priests and Levites in every section of the land to carry out certain functions. For example, as an example, there were certain ritual cleansing and ritual laws For instance, if someone, the priests and the Levites supporting them, were charged with declaring certain things as being ritually pure or impure, clean or unclean, and so the Levites do not receive land, but they receive tithes from the other 11 tribes. Okay, so in the 14th chapter, Joshua, the one that assisted Moses, has grown, who took the reins after Moses' demise, is now very old. He's going to recount as he is passing the mantle of leadership to Caleb. Uh, he recounts of when he was 40 years old, when Moses sent him in as a spy, that he was a fighter, and he still feels like fighting, but now it's time to turn over the responsibilities to Caleb. And Joshua affirms that God has given the people this land permanently. Now, of course, what we end up seeing in the biblical record is they do not occupy and they do not steward this land permanently. That the land was based on a covenant, on a contract arrangement between God and the people. They were to properly steward what God had given them, and when they failed to steward them, then they lost the rights to the land. I remarked on how the land distribution and allocation was done with a certain precision and order. It was appropriately compartmentalized. This looks a lot like the law from Deuteronomy and Leviticus. Looks a lot like creation in Genesis 1 and 2 and 3. However, from Genesis, and of course Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy are often called the books of Moses, that he wrote them, and if that is indeed true, if they come from the Mosaic tradition, here Joshua and the account of Joshua comes on the heels of that. So, back in Genesis, remember when at creation, God gave man and woman a sacred and divine vocation of stewardship, of land, of a garden. They failed their task, and they were exiled from the garden. Likewise, and that was in chapter 3 of Genesis. Then in chapter 4, Cain murders his brother Abel. There God says, your brother's blood screams from the ground, screams from the land. In that sense, the land was improperly stewarded. So, and then Cain was sent into exile. So there is this idea that God gives the land and to be stewarded. However, failure to steward that leads to exile. And so while Joshua says here that God gave them this land permanently, we know from the whole entire corpus of the Hebrew Scriptures that the land, the covenant, was based on their proper and faithful stewardship, and without faithfully fulfilling their divine task, it was going to inevitably lead to exile. They were going to lose the land. And so throughout these 3 chapters, there's quite an extensive discussion on land. Perhaps it's a legal record, but also that there's something more important about that. Land is what they had. They didn't have, by and large, 90-some% of the population did not have any methods of accumulating real wealth. Any wealth that they had was incorporated from the land. If they had lots of land, that was a form of wealth. Obviously, they were able to grow more food, that they were able to store for themselves, or perhaps barter, trade, sell. If they had a lot of livestock, they needed the land. Everything, the land was the lifeblood of civilization. They spent their entire lives on the same plot of land. They worked that land. That is what they left their posterity as an inheritance, was the land. They didn't have 401ks, as it were, or pensions. The land is what sustained them from birth to death. And in a time of such short lifespan, the way you continued on, your legacy was left through the land, through properly stewarding that land in your lifetime and passing it on. And so that is why the land is so significant here in Joshua. One more thing is, are a group of, here's a collective that had been slaves in Egypt. Being slaves, you lose a certain sense of identity. You certainly are void of a certain sense of ownership. Now that they have made their conquest into the promised land, that they are taking a certain sense of ownership. And so for people who are void of identity, this land is part of reasserting and reattesting their identity. So with that, we've got 3 readings left, and we'll see what the rest of Joshua has in store for us. Again, if you have any questions or comments, anything to address, I can do it anonymously in a video. Send me anything that you have, and we'll try to start synthesizing the book of Joshua in its entirety by the end of the week's reading. Happy Monday. Thank you for joining with me, and I will see you on the next reading.